I walked in on my wife, Sarah, and her fling, a guy I'll call Chad, in our bed. Let me tell you, I kicked him out of the house so fast he probably didn't have time to put his shoes on. I'm Mike, a 44-year-old guy, and Sarah, my soon-to-be ex-wife, is 39. We've been married for 11 years, no kids. Until a couple of years ago, we were what you'd call a comfortable couple, both of us carrying a few extra pounds. That changed when I got a blood test that basically told me, shape up or you're headed for diabetes, gout, and hypertension. It scared me straight. Slowly but surely, Sarah and I overhauled our lifestyles, and we both shed the weight. I dropped from 258 pounds to 187, and Sarah went from 183 to a lean 143. We were feeling fantastic, and thank God I avoided all those health issues. We started hitting the gym almost every day in the afternoons, where Chad worked as a personal trainer. Chad was the classic gym bro, super ripped, always showing off, and constantly checking out women. I swear, this guy couldn't look at a mirror without flexing. As Sarah got more fit, I noticed most guys turned to see her, and honestly, I was proud of her. She's always had an amazing figure, great legs and, well, she's naturally curvy. Chad, of course, wasn't immune to noticing her either. One day, we were on the elliptical machines, and Chad decided it was showtime. He ripped off his shirt and started doing cable crossovers right in front of us. I rolled my eyes and gave Sarah a, "Can you believe this guy?" look, but she was staring at him. Then she licked her lips. No joke. I glanced back at Chad, and he was grinning like he knew exactly what he was doing. That moment crushed me. Sure, I'd been making progress in the gym, but I was nowhere near Chad's level of peak fitness. On the drive home, I brought it up, saying something about Chad showing off. Sarah acted clueless, like, what? I didn't notice. I told her, you were staring. She brushed it off with, I must have been thinking about something else. I let it go, but from that point on, I couldn't ignore how much they started chatting at the gym. A few weeks later, I saw Chad helping Sarah with squats on the Smith machine. He had his hands on her waist, and it made my blood boil. When her first set ended, I marched over and told him, not so politely, I've got it from here. He just smiled, all smug, and said, no problem, buddy. He calls everyone buddy. Sarah immediately snapped at me, oh my God, Mike. I told her, we'll talk at home. At home, things exploded. She called me jealous and immature, while I accused her of letting Chad cross boundaries. She claimed she'd never cheat on me and only let him help because she didn't want to be rude. After a heated argument, we agreed to switch gyms. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Sarah was clearly pissed, and for months, she was distant, blaming me for not trusting her. Fast forward a bit, and I got a new work opportunity that required me to switch to morning gym sessions while Sarah kept going in the afternoons. That's when things started to unravel. Sarah's resentment grew, and we barely talked anymore. I'd send her texts about my day, silly memes, or just, I miss you, but her replies were short and cold, yes, okay, same, or just, huh. I was so worried that I even suggested couples therapy, but she shot it down, saying I was the one who needed help with my trust issues. Desperate to save our marriage, I agreed and started therapy. A year went by. I worked on myself, but Sarah didn't change. Our intimacy disappeared completely, she was never in the mood. I started to suspect something was up, so I snooped on her phone but found nothing unusual. I even checked her car for a second phone or any sign of cheating. Still, nothing. Her map history only showed routine trips, home, work, gym, home. Whenever I brought up how distant she'd become, she brushed it off, saying she was just going through a midlife phase. Then one day, our condo's security guard, Mr. Paul, mentioned something that made my stomach drop. He casually told me he'd hurt his shoulder moving a sofa and joked, "Maybe you can get your wife's masseuse to take a look." Confused, I asked, "What masseuse?" He replied, "The guy who was here yesterday to give Mrs. Sarah a massage." My heart sank. I asked if he had footage, and sure enough, it was Chad. Taking the day off work, I borrowed a coworker's car and followed Sarah that afternoon. She drove to the mall where the gym was, and guess who was waiting for her? Chad. They laughed and hugged like a couple, then walked hand in hand to a nearby residential area. I tried to follow, phone in hand to record, but the guard at the building stopped me. When I asked, "Do you know that couple?" he said, "Oh, the newlyweds. They're so sweet." Crushed, I called Sarah's phone, but she didn't answer. That's when I noticed her phone was still in her car, probably why nothing unusual showed up on her map history. To make it worse, I realized she hadn't been to the gym in 8 months. That night, I lay in bed next to her, knowing it would be the last time we'd ever share the same space like this. After returning the car, I went straight home and called my parents. Thankfully, my dad picked up. Between sobs, I poured out the whole story to him. He comforted me, told me to stay strong, and suggested gathering as much evidence as possible. He also promised to reach out to one of his friends, a top-notch divorce lawyer. Later, Sarah called me, likely noticing the 2 missed calls. I kept my tone steady and told her I was already home. She replied, "I'm on my way back from the gym. My legs are killing me." Yeah, I bet they are. When she got home and saw my face, she asked, "What happened? Have you been crying?" Somehow, I managed to stay composed. I forced a smile and told her, "I think I caught the flu, which is why I left work early. Better keep your distance, I don't want you catching it. I'll go get tested tomorrow and sleep in the spare room tonight." She didn't argue and agreed. That night, I cried silently, unable to sleep. Around midnight, I heard her giggling from the other room. I assumed she was messaging Chad, but when I checked her phone, I found no evidence of her talking to another man. Then it hit me, how had I missed it before? Chad was probably posing as one of her female co-workers in her contact list. The next morning, while Sarah was in the shower, I took her phone and synced it with my laptop to create a session. We both knew each other's passcodes. Once her phone was back where I found it, I started digging through the messages. And there it was, under a woman's name with a dumbbell as the profile picture. Most of the conversations had been wiped, but the messages left behind were coded. For example, "Can you deliver the papers on my desk?" I knew she didn't even have a desk at work. Another said, "Heading to the meeting, where are you?" And the kicker, "Boss is in his office. He's clueless." I figured I was the boss, given that Sarah's actual boss is a woman. When Sarah got out of the shower, she looked at me and said, "You look worse today. Why don't you go stay with your parents for a while?" I brushed it off, saying I'd handle it, but in truth, I wasn't ready to leave yet. I needed more evidence. After she left for work, I called my dad, who gave me the lawyer's name and number. When I explained everything to the lawyer, he told me the screenshots I'd captured weren't enough to prove an affair. The messages were too vague, and Chad's name wasn't mentioned. Even if I photographed them at the mall, she could claim they were just friends. I couldn't follow them into the residential area either, as that could get me into legal trouble. At work, I couldn't concentrate, running on autopilot while trying to figure out my next move. Installing cameras at home crossed my mind, but Chad rarely came over, and Sarah might discover them. Then an idea hit me, I needed to take myself out of the picture. I texted Sarah, telling her I'd tested positive for the flu and would stay at my parents' house for a few days. She loved the idea, saying she'd miss me but promised to call every day. After hanging up, I reached out to my dad and my brother to set up a plan. When I got home, Sarah had already packed a suitcase for me. She seemed a little too eager to see me go. I grabbed my laptop and checked her messages one last time before leaving. Right after I told her I'd tested positive, she messaged, "Boss will be out of the office. Wanna come to my desk?" Bingo. She took the bait. There was no dinner, no kiss goodbye, not even a hug. Twice, I caught her glancing at her watch. As I left, I told her, "I'll miss you," half expecting her to slam the door behind me. Instead, she walked me to my car. It seemed out of character until I realized why. Chad was probably already in the building, maybe even in her car. After driving off, I circled back to my house. My dad and brother were stationed nearby, keeping watch, but Chad hadn't shown up. That's when I figured it out, he was already inside. I parked quietly and sneaked back into the house. From the hallway, I heard music coming from the bedroom, along with moaning. Their clothes were tossed on the sofa by the door. My heart raced, but I hit record on my phone and burst into the room. There they were, Sarah, the love of my life for 11 years, on all fours, with Chad behind her. Their faces froze in shock when they saw me. Sarah screamed and scrambled for a blanket to cover herself. Chad, in all his naked glory, strutted toward me like some alpha male, shouting, "Why don't you take a walk, buddy?" I didn't think. My hand shot out, hitting his throat just like that move in Ransom with Mel Gibson. Chad collapsed, coughing and gasping for air, kneeling on the floor. I bellowed, "Get out of my house," and shoved his clothes at him. By the time I kicked him out, my dad, brother, and our condo's security guard, Mr. Paul, had arrived. I told them, "I'll handle this from here," then slammed the door shut behind me. When I walked back into the bedroom, Sarah was still on the bed, trembling and clutching the blanket to her chest. I took a deep breath and said, "I've never laid a hand on you, and I never will. Get dressed. I'll be waiting in the living room." While I waited, I sent the video to my lawyer. His response came back almost instantly, "I'm so sorry you're going through this, but jackpot." A few minutes later, Sarah walked into the room, unable to meet my gaze. I pulled out my phone and started recording our conversation. "Why?" I asked. She stayed silent. Was I such a terrible husband? My voice cracked, but she still didn't respond. Tears streamed down her face, but not a single word came out. "Do you love him?" I pressed. She shook her head no, but that was it. Frustrated, I slammed my hand on the table and shouted, "Say something, Sarah. Damn it." She flinched, her eyes wide with fear, like a frightened puppy. I'd never raised my voice at her before, and seeing her react like that broke something inside me. I sat back down, forcing myself to calm down. "My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce." "You need to get yourself a lawyer too," I said firmly. Finally, she spoke. "We can fix this." "Fix what?" I shot back. Our marriage was over the second Chad came into the picture. "You chose him over me." "It was a mistake," she cried. "No, Sarah. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You made your choice, and these are the consequences. What did you think would happen when I found out?" She had no answer. Just silence. I stood up and added, "Go stay with your sister and tell her the truth. If you don't, I'll show her the video myself." Sarah retreated to the bedroom to pack her things. I followed her and stood silently as she neatly folded her clothes and placed them in the suitcase. Watching her do this, with all the little mannerisms I once loved, hit me like a truck. I realized, once and for all, that the woman I'd been living with these past months wasn't my wife anymore. I walked to the spare room and broke down, ugly crying until I could barely breathe. I heard the front door click shut a while later. Sarah had picked up her clothes from the sofa and even made the bed where I'd caught her with Chad. I collapsed onto the floor, the weight of it all finally crushing me. Later that evening, I called my dad. He told me Chad had threatened to press charges for the throat punch, but Mr. Paul reminded him that he hadn't signed in and was trespassing. The condo could sue him instead. That shut him up pretty quick. My dad also scolded my brother for eavesdropping on my door and hauled him off by the ear. I was drained, both physically and emotionally. After days of barely sleeping, I passed out in the spare room. D-Day +1, Friday. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages from Sarah. Apologies, please for a second chance, it was all too much. I blocked her. My sister-in-law called me later, but it was clear Sarah hadn't told her the truth, just that we were fighting. I wasn't about to be the one to explain it, so I told her to ask Sarah herself. That afternoon, I had a heart-to-heart with Mr. Paul. Turns out, he'd faked his shoulder injury to tip me off about Chad. He also mentioned that a nosy neighbor had seen me kick Chad out of the apartment, naked, and that the whole condo would probably know about it by the end of the week. My brother stopped by to help me change the locks. Once he left, the silence in the apartment hit me like a ton of bricks, and I cried until I couldn't anymore. That night, my lawyer called with updates. The divorce papers were in progress. He explained that, with the evidence I had, the divorce would proceed as mutual consent, which would be faster and less messy than an uncaused divorce. He also warned me not to share the video with anyone. Sarah would be served in 2 weeks. D-Day +2, Saturday. My sister-in-law showed up at my place, demanding answers. Against my better judgment, I showed her the video. Her face went pale, and she was speechless for a while. Later, I drove her home and saw Sarah's car parked outside. The sight of it crushed me all over again, and I cried myself to sleep that night. D-Day +3, Sunday. I visited my parents. My mom cried with me, saying she never would have imagined Sarah doing something like this. She'd always loved her. My dad, on the other hand, was all business, sitting me down to discuss my finances and assets. When I got home, Mr. Paul filled me in. Both Sarah and Chad had shown up that day. Sarah came in the morning. She saw my car wasn't there and tried to get into the apartment, but her key didn't work anymore. She asked Mr. Paul if he knew where I was, and he handed her my lawyer's card, just as I'd instructed. She left after that. Chad showed up in the afternoon, asking to see Sarah. Mr. Paul made a point of emphasizing Mrs. Sarah doesn't live here anymore. Chad then asked about me, and Mr. Paul told him I was away, with no idea of when I'd return. Chad left shortly after. That night, I caught myself wanting to ask about Sarah, if she looked okay, if she'd asked about me. But then I remembered D-Day and let the thought go. I just thanked Mr. Paul and went inside. That night, I cried again. D-Day +4, Monday. I didn't want to, but I knew I needed to hit the gym again. I found a new one near my job and had a solid workout. Surprisingly, it felt good. I went back to work afterward and, for the first time, didn't cry when I got home. Instead, I started taking down all the pictures of Sarah. D-Day +5, Tuesday. I met with my lawyer to go over my assets. Luckily, my dad had made Sarah sign a prenup when we got married, so she can't touch anything I own beforehand, mainly my house. As for everything else, it'll be split 50-50, but I'll also be seeking compensation for her adultery. My lawyer advised me that this compensation could offset any alimony, which was a relief. Technically, I could fight for everything, but honestly, I just want to move on. Everything in that house reminds me of her, and I'm ready for a fresh start. On my way out of the house, I heard whispers behind me. Turning around, I spotted 2 neighbors who quickly pretended not to notice me and walked past, greeting me like everything was normal. I'd expected this kind of gossip. Afterward, I stuck to my new routine: gym, work, repeat. D-Day +6, Wednesday. Nothing noteworthy happened. I ignored all the DMs on Facebook from people asking me to contact Sarah. Instead, I closed the app and hopped on Reddit, where I spent the day reading stories from others who've survived similar situations. Their resilience gave me hope, and for the first time, I felt a little lighter. D-Day +7, Thursday. I decided to start writing my own story. I posted the first part before heading to the gym. By the time I got to work, I was amazed at how many people had reacted to it. Reading their comments and engaging with them gave me a sense of validation I hadn't felt in a long time. D-Day +8, Friday. I spent the morning replying to comments on my post, and it actually made me smile. 2 suggestions stood out to me. The first, report Chad to my old gym. The second, sell or rent my house because it's too tied to bad memories. Both ideas resonated with me. I haven't stepped foot in my bedroom since D-Day. I've been sleeping in the spare room. This place doesn't feel like home anymore. Before heading to the gym, I started looking into real estate agents to help me move forward. D-Day +9, Saturday. Knowing Sarah might come by to bother me, I decided to spend the day outside. Sure enough, she showed up, then visited my parents and brother. All I got were texts from them saying, "Sarah came by." I simply replied, "Thanks, but I'm not ready to talk about her yet." D-Day +10, Sunday. I spent the day with my parents, and we took a trip to a town a couple of hours away. It was exactly what I needed, a day full of laughter and good company. I'm not sure if Sarah tried to come by again, but honestly, I didn't care. Before heading home, my dad gave me some advice: don't sell the house, rent it instead. I agreed, it made sense. When I got back, Mr. Paul informed me that Chad had shown up again, alone this time. He asked for me, but Mr. Paul told him I wasn't around. Chad left without saying much. D-Day +11, Monday. That morning, I decided to visit my old gym. I wasn't sure if I'd run into Chad, but I figured he might have switched to a morning shift to cover his tracks. I didn't see him, so I asked to speak to Frank, the gym's owner. While waiting, I ran into an old janitor I used to chat with. He smiled and said, "Say hi to Miss Sarah for me." I nodded politely, realizing I'd need to start telling people we'd split up. When Frank finally met with me, I asked about Chad's schedule. Turns out, Monday is his day off, and he now works mornings from Tuesday to Sunday. I then explained why I was there and showed Frank the video. He listened intently, then called over another coach named Harry, who was one of Chad's close friends. What Harry shared blew my mind. He revealed that Chad is completely smitten with Sarah, so much so that he's planning to trap her into marriage by getting her pregnant. Frank confirmed this, adding that Chad's behavior had improved recently, with no complaints from female gym members for months. It was clear to me now, this guy was on his best behavior because he wanted to lock Sarah down. As I processed this, a laugh started bubbling up from deep inside me. Before I knew it, I was laughing uncontrollably, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't just a laugh, it was the kind of crazed, cathartic laugh you see in movies. Frank and Harry stared at me, confused. Once I calmed down, Harry asked, "What's so funny?" Frank explained, "This is Sarah's husband." Harry's face went pale. "Oh, man. This is bad. Really messed up," he muttered before quickly excusing himself. Frank and I then discussed firing Chad. He explained that he'd need to report the situation to the coach association, not the real name, as Sarah had been a gym member. If he didn't, the gym could face legal repercussions. Frank also mentioned that Chad would likely lose his license once my lawyer submitted the necessary evidence, including the video and details from my divorce case. When I mentioned the residential area where I'd followed Sarah and Chad, Frank's face darkened. "Wait, which residential area?" he asked. I pulled up the location on my phone. Frank's expression turned to anger. "That's my late father's house," he exclaimed. He explained that he'd inherited the property and occasionally let Chad use it to store gym equipment. Chad must have made a copy of the key and was now using the house without permission. Frank promised to investigate further, noting that the house was covered in cameras. As I was leaving the gym, I heard someone calling out, Mr. P, wait." It was Harry, running after me. He caught up and said, "I'm really sorry about everything that's happening. Chad never told me who his girlfriend was. He just said he met her at that mall." I nodded and thanked him, taking a step toward the exit. Then he blurted out, "Can you tell me what happened?" I sighed. "Pretty much what you've already heard. He was screwing my wife, and now I'm divorcing her." I took another step. "What's going to happen to Chad?" he asked, clearly trying to dig for more. "That depends on Frank and the coach association," I replied, trying to walk away again. But he wouldn't let it go. "How are you handling it?" Something about the way he asked made me stop. I stared at Harry for a moment, and a thought hit me. Chad had been to my house twice before. "Suspicious," I said. "You called Chad, didn't you? He's on his way here, and you're just stalling me. Am I right?" Harry's face turned guilty. "Please, Mr. P, talk to him. He's desperate. He was crying yesterday. His your wife, isn't returning his calls." I raised an eyebrow. "Tell me, why on earth should I care if he's miserable?" Harry pleaded, "I'll stay here with you. You don't have to be scared." I laughed out loud. "Scared? Of that weakling? Did he forget to mention I kicked him out of my house buck naked?" Harry looked skeptical. "Fine," I said with a shrug. "Let's hear what he has to say. This should be good." I noticed the cameras in the reception area and decided to sit down at a table there. I doubted Chad would try anything stupid in front of witnesses, but you never know. Besides, I was genuinely curious about what he wanted. 10 minutes later, Chad came running in and spotted me. He extended his hand, but I crossed my arms, leaving him hanging. "What the hell do you want?" I asked, glaring straight into his eyes. He sat down across from me. "Listen, buddy." "Stop," I interrupted. "We're not buddies. Mr. S, the janitor, is my buddy. You're nothing." Chad looked sheepish. "Okay, my bad. I just want to say I'm sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you. I really care about Sarah." I scoffed. "That's 3 lies in a row. You're not sorry, you absolutely meant to destroy my life, and you only care about yourself." His tone shifted from apologetic to annoyed. "Okay, whatever, man. Just tell me where Sarah is." I leaned back, smirking. "The last time I saw her was when I kicked her cheating ass out of my house, right after I threw you out naked." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Harry flinch. Chad's face flushed red with anger. "That was a cheap shot. I should sue you." I leaned forward. "As far as I know, you entered my house illegally. For all I know, you were assaulting my wife. I have video proof of you leaving, and guess what? You didn't sign in at the condo. So, good luck with that lawsuit." Chad's expression changed again, this time to desperation. Okay, I'm sorry. Just, tell me what you want. Please, let Sarah know I need to talk to her." At that moment, Frank burst into the room, clearly having seen Chad on the cameras. "Everything okay here?" I nodded. "Everything's fine, Frank. I was just telling this clown what I want." I stood up and leaned close to Chad's face. "What I want is for you to get exactly what's coming to you. You wrecked my life, and now I'm going to crush your dreams. You want kids? Guess what, you won't have them. Not now, not ever. Chad started to say, what's that supposed to mean, but Frank cut him off, ordering him to his office. Harry grabbed Chad's arm and muttered, dude, you're in deep shit. I finally walked out of the gym, feeling like I just won a small battle in this war. D-Day plus 12, Tuesday. Today, I feel ready to face Sarah again. Writing all this out and getting it off my chest has been therapeutic, and honestly, I'm still grinning while typing this. So, how have you been?